Despite the fact that it's become fairly clear he has no chance of winning, Hoover is easily renominated by the Republicans in 1932. The Democrats turned to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, let's talk about Roosevelt for a minute. Roosevelt is like his cousin, Teddy Roosevelt, is from one of the richest, most powerful families in America. He's extremely aristocratic. He had gone to Harvard, and at Harvard he was so elitist that there was a special dining room where only the rich students were allowed to eat. Only members of this certain club were allowed to eat. Roosevelt wouldn't eat in that dining room. He ate in a private room by himself off of that dining room. Just like his cousin, he idolized his cousin Teddy Roosevelt. He joined the New York legislature and also served as Undersecretary of the Navy, just like Teddy Roosevelt had. In 1920, he was the Democratic Party's nominee for vice president. But in 1921, he struck with polio, and this will change the course of his life. As he tries to recover from this disease, he begins to see the world much differently. He begins to see other people struggling with this, not all of whom are wealthy, and he also gets to know the nurses and the medical staff who take care of him, of course, who are also not wealthy, powerful people. And when Roosevelt comes back, he survives polio. Now, granted, he's unable to walk, but he does survive, and he runs for governor of New York in 1928. He's a much different man. He actually uses the government of New York to help the poor when the economy collapses. And Roosevelt, the elitist, has now, both in terms of the way America perceives him, and I think pretty clearly in terms of who he is as a person, is changed by polio. He's no longer this rich kid who's had everything handed to him on a silver platter. He's somebody who's kind of stared into the abyss and didn't blink. He's somebody who understands suffering and pain, and I think is a better person for it. He avoids cultural issues. He doesn't get into the whole rural-urban split. He's not going to talk about alcohol. Remember, prohibition is still technically around, and issues like evolution and stuff. He talks about economic issues. He's the first candidate ever to show up at his convention and accept the nomination in person. And he promises America a New Deal. Now, it's worth understanding why a New Deal? Because Teddy had promised them a fair deal. And so he's saying, I'm going to be like my cousin Teddy and give you a new fair deal. That's what the New Deal is. He doesn't give any details. He doesn't explain what this is going to be when he runs. Hoover thinks that because FDR is disabled, he can't win the election. But the FDR campaign is very good at not letting people know that he can't walk. In fact, when he accepts his nomination at the convention, the the broadcasters give a brief reference to him getting out of his chair. And the Hoover campaign thinks that that's it. They've won the election because now everybody will realize he's crippled. But the media chooses to not highlight this. And most Americans didn't know. FDR wins in a landslide victory. And the Democrats win huge majorities in both the House and the Senate. And now FDR has become president, and he's essentially going to be able to do whatever he wants. The 4 months between the election and Hoover leaving office are interesting. We call them the interregnum. Hoover pressures FDR to continue Hoover's policies. If you can imagine the nerve of Hoover, who's got all these failed policies in an economy that's not improving, telling the guy who's elected, don't do what you said you were going to do when you ran for office. Do what I'm doing. FDR politely declines. 1 month before FDR comes into office, we have the most significant bank collapse crisis, and runs on banks. People running down to try to get their money out of the banks before they run out of money. Hoover demands that FDR not run large deficits. FDR says, no, I'm not going to promise you anything. Hoover and FDR ride in the inauguration together. This is such a great moment in American history. It's March 4th, 1933. And you see what it looks like in real life, them sitting next to each other in the car. And then you see what the New Yorker did with this. And this is very much the public image, whether it was real or not, of these two men, the dour, bitter Hoover and the cheerful, optimistic FDR. And it's interesting because up until this time, Hoover had been seen as this energetic, can-do guy who was filled with confidence and optimism. But you see what the Great Depression did to his image, if not to the man himself.